Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 6th edition of Culture Dose, Art for Wellbeing. My name's Danielle Galotta, and I'm the Access Programs Producer at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the country that the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Black Dog Institute stands. We acknowledge the Gadigal and the Bidigal peoples of the Eora Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So again, welcome to our participants today, people who have previously engaged in our program, and for first-time participants. As you know, Culture Dose is a fortnightly program produced by the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Black Dog Institute. It's a fortnightly experience that invites you to take time out for yourself, to connect with your own feelings, thoughts and imagination through art. In each session, we will focus on 3 works from the collection, and we'll create time and space for you to look closely, imagine and respond. And we hope that in this experience, you also read the works with your own body.
Hello, everyone. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome and thank you for joining our 6th session of our fortnightly noon sessions of Culture Dose. I'm Catherine Boydell. I'm a professor of mental health at the Black Dog Institute. And my program of research focuses on using the arts in the research process to produce research data and to share research findings using visual, performative, and literary genres. Culture Dose is based on the Arts on Prescription program, a collaboration between Danielle and the Art Gallery of New South Wales and myself and Black Dog Institute. Our research exploring the impact of the Arts on Prescription program showed significant increases in mental health and well-being and in a sense of community inclusion and connectedness. Based on these positive findings, we decided to extend the arts engagement to the broader public. I'd also like to take the opportunity to share with you that Culture Dose was featured on ABC National Radio's All in the Mind program, where Danielle and I and a few participants from our Arts on Prescription program spoke with Lynn Malcolm about the arts engagement series. They've also produced a podcast on one of Culture Dose's earlier sessions that many of you may have attended, focused on Henry Fanton Latour's work, Flowers and Fruit. So it was really nice to see that this is getting some publicity. And if you'd like to see the podcast, if you just Google All in the Mind Culture Dose, it'll take you right to the site. I'm going to be moderating the discussion this afternoon, so please ensure that your video and microphone are off during the session. You'll be invited to share your responses in the chat box. You'll see that you have the option of responding only to the panelists, Danielle and I, or to all attendees if you want the entire group to view your comments. We'll also suggest that you might want to have a pencil, pen, or other materials present during the session in case you'd like to draw, doodle, or engage in any other creative activity during the session. We also encourage you, inspired by viewing the artworks, to create something of your own following the session, and we have a Facebook page and website that you can make that contribution. The 6th session, as Danielle mentioned, is titled The Creative Process. And to prepare for the session, I'd like to engage you in a brief meditative exercise. Please begin by bringing your attention into your body. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. You can notice your body seated wherever you're seated, feeling the weight of your body on the chair, on the floor. Take a few deep breaths. And as you take a deep breath, breathe in more oxygen, enlivening the body. And as you exhale, have a sense of relaxing more deeply. You can notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor, the weight and pressure, vibration, heat. You can notice your legs against the chair, pressure, pulsing, heaviness, lightness. Notice your back against the chair. Bring your attention into your stomach area. If your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften. Take a breath. Notice your hands. Are your hands tense or tight? See if you can allow them to soften. Notice your arms. Feel any sensation in your arms. Let your shoulders be soft. Notice your neck and throat. Let them be soft. Relax. Soften your jaw. Let your face and facial muscles be soft. Then notice your whole body present. Take one more breath. Be aware of your whole body as best you can. Take a breath. And then, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Today's session will focus on the theme of the creative process. The quality of being curious is an important element in the creative process, where an artist's inquisitiveness leads to the exploration of ideas, subject matter, and the development of a language to express and communicate. Creative practices involve the capacity for us all to experiment and to contemplate an idea with an imagination and vision. So the selection of artworks we've chosen today for this session invites us all to observe closely, reflect on our senses, and become aware of moments when we engage with creativity in tasks in our daily lives. We'll transition to our first work. And I invite you to take a few moments to survey the painting. To immerse yourself in the narrative here. We find ourselves here in an art studio. A range of students focused in their own practice. This image is almost like a photographic snapshot where the subjects, the figures in the painting, are totally unaware of the viewer, of us peering into this scene. You'll notice the works on the student's easel. The two portraits on the easel resemble the figure seated in the foreground. The young woman who is now resting and reading. She wears a black dress and an ornate white smock with a ruffled collar. We see her resting and reading. And we imagine the narrative here that that young woman has been the model for these students who are now working at their easel. These artists are focused, they're determined, and they're working from life. I invite you to take notice of the environment. If you look into the distance, there is a plaster cast, and on the back wall, several canvases leaning. The studio has a wooden floor that looks worn and slightly messy. These artists are engaged in the moment. They're engaged with their painting, observing the colour, the composition, observing the proportions, I imagine. When you look at this artwork, I imagine you get a sense of the past. The women are dressed quite differently to contemporary times. They have similar attire on. The fashion of the turn of the century. These young women here, these art students, are acquiring the skills through drawing, observation, and focus. I want you to imagine the thoughts of sensory experiences you would have if you were able to be seated in this room. To imagine the smell of oil paint, linseed oil, and turpentine. The textured experience of holding a brush and a palette. And perhaps the sound of discussion between the students and the tutor. The artists here are not only trying to capture the likeness of the model, but to capture the light reflecting from her flesh, to capture light, atmosphere, and mood. Just as our artist here has depicted this portrait by capturing the light of this interior of the art room. I'd like to invite you to perhaps share some of your thoughts connected to this artwork. Perhaps to invent a narrative or to imagine the creative process that these students are going through.
We have a comment from Catherine, Danielle, that they're all women artists.
Yes. It's an interesting composition here of young women at the turn of the century being provided opportunities and access to arts education that previously would have been very much a male-dominated practice. The colours here are quite gritty, and the texture of their clothing to give a sense of the process that our artist here has created for us.
We have a comment from Paula. I think even the bust is female, women creating representations of themselves as they wish to be seen. Mm-hmm. And another comment, I find the setting really peaceful.
They're definitely here to learn, to experiment, to break away from stereotypes. These were women in the forefront of engaging in the arts.
We have a comment from Brenda. They're all so pale and beautiful, idealized to be true.
It's interesting that the artist who has composed this image, in a sense, has created several portraits in one. And the artist, in this sort of gritty style, has been committed to depicting an in-the-moment experience from a direct observation. So imagine that the artist creating this painting is at the other side of the room and depicting this image for us to share in. The experimentation.
Oh, sorry, Danielle, just a couple more comments I wanted to share. Yeah. We have a comment, I would imagine it to be a chatty social place. And another, the model is so self-contained and separate from the process and the artwork. And another, I can imagine the creaky wooden floor when students step to look at their work from afar or close. And I like the mismatched chairs and messy studio. Mm. And then we have another comment. It is somber and serious, reflecting the women's desire to be treated seriously as artists.
Mm. They're wonderful observations. And yes, I can imagine the creaking of the floor the sounds of chatter. As I mentioned, the smell of the oil paint. Perhaps an open window where we might hear some sounds from the street and allow a breeze in. Otherwise, that smell can become quite intoxicating. The figure in the centre of the painting, with the dark smock, seems to almost be transported into a creative zone. She's looking, focused, and assessing her work. And we can see the figure behind her with the white smock holding a paintbrush, coming to peer at her colleague's work. And as a participant has shared, perhaps that chatter and that discussion of where people have given insights and perhaps advice to their peers.
We have a comment, the figure with the dark smock looks like she's looking at someone else's work to compare to her own, as you noted, Danielle. And we also have Moira saying there's a tangible air of focus and concentration in the room, which is what I thought. They all look quite intent and serious. So they're taking this quite seriously.
And I wonder if anyone in the program today has perhaps participated in an art class or a life drawing class and can reflect or connect to this artwork of when you have a direct experience where you need to be present, to be focused, in order to get into that sort of creative zone. Sometimes you hear artists speak about where they need to really just focus on being present and observing, understanding what appears closer and further away, as well as assessing tones of colour.
We have a comment from the audience. Jillian is curious about the abandoned paint tubes on the floor, which I have to admit I didn't even notice.
Where apparently when this painting was exhibited, many critics noticed the detriment, the objects on the floor, and thought it was unladylike, which again shows the stereotype parameters of the time. And I suppose it's the reality of an art studio when people are working quickly and there are several sessions of classes, that it might get a little bit, I was going to say grotty, on the floor or in the studio.
We have a comment, or even a bit grumpy and throw the paint down in frustration.
I can imagine that would happen with some of these young women. I'm imagining there may even be other students that we're not seeing in this space because of the format. You might be drawn, your attention might be drawn to the fact that this is a very long painting, in a very tall horizontal painting that obviously allows us to see the full length of these figures, but then really gives us that narrow view, almost like a photograph snapshot that I mentioned earlier. So perhaps there are other students, perhaps even some male students on our periphery. It allows us to imagine and invent our own narrative to accompany the work. Again, this work is also an exploration of textures, the texture of the smocks, of the dresses, of the wonderful curtains that hang. I'm imagining some Victorian velvet curtains that give a sense of grandeur to this space. The depiction of hair and hands, and as someone mentioned, the delicate faces, in contrast to that worn wooden floor. So the virtuosity of the artist to observe closely, to capture light, and in a way to experiment with this composition. At the time when it was created, was heralded as an innovative and very modern and progressive painting.
We have some comments, Danielle, addressing the color. So Diane says, I love the little bit of red in the background, the green of her shirt and the blue of the model's cap. And Brenda comments, it doesn't look chatty to me. They're concentrating too hard. My experience is that the time in a room is also space not to be distracted by domestic things in the home. It's a serious workplace that is a serious space.
Mm. So definitely looking at a side of creativity that requires commitment and focus here. I'm going to share with you the name of the artist, which many of you may be familiar with, and the title. So the painting is by E. Phillips Fox, the Australian artist, and the painting is humbly titled Art Students from 1895. It's an oil painting on a particularly large scale, so 182.9 centimetres long, tall, and 114.3 centimetres wide. This particular work, again, celebrates the commitment to documenting a scene and capturing the reality of the light, colour, and atmosphere. And so we get a lens into the process of Emmanuel Phillips Fox's work, but we also get in a lens into students' practice and their development of process and understanding of the human body and the processes of oil painting. We transition to our second work, and I wanted to invite people to consider the creative practices that they have in their everyday life. Whether you're someone who practices a craft, such as quilting or ikebana flower arranging or woodwork, there's a range of creative practices that require problem solving, risk-taking, and imagination. And I'll pass to our next work. Which again shows perhaps a domestic scene or as a tailor dressmaker's studio. Again, in this composition, we see that industrious focus, We see two figures seated in an interior, sewing at a table. The artwork here is in black and white and has a very strong design element to it. We have the figure closest to us, seated and sewing with a needle and thread. And the figure opposite the table using an electric sewing machine. The window in the background reminds me of some Dutch paintings, and that sharp light that comes in allows for the contrast between light and shade or shadow. We can imagine the narrative here. What are they making? Who are they making it for? Is there a deadline? In the background, we see a mannequin where we assume that the dressmakers will place the garment upon the mannequin to do the finer details. Behind the mannequin upon the wall is an image. We get the impression that's the image of a dress worn by a figure. Perhaps it's a dress that these seamstresses have made. Or perhaps it's an image that they aspire to. I invite you to imagine a narrative that to accompany this work.
We have a comment from Giovanna. Everyone is leaning in towards the table, including the headless mannequin, and seems keen to follow the progress of what is happening.
Yes, it does almost seem animated. We get a sense here. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it reminds me a bit of a negative, of a photograph negative that you used to get when you got your photos developed.
Yes, it does. If we look closely at this piece, we get a sense that there's a very strong design element here in this print that gives a very modern sense to the image.
Catherine makes an interesting observation, a very masculine arm on the figure in the foreground. Lino cut print.
Yes, this is a woodblock print actually, and it gives those very sort of bold contrasts with light and dark to give that sense of mystery in a way. I feel this work really celebrates that creativity of domestic work or work that are associated with textiles. Those large dressmaker scissors, seamstress and tailor's scissors that we see on the table. Imagined cutting through the fabric, the sound, the physicality that those arms need to have to cut.
Another interesting observation from Anne. She notes that the figure in the dress in the poster on the wall is the stylized feminine shape, and the women at the table are strong and muscular.
Mm. That's a very interesting observation.
Diane says the closest woman has very prominent cheekbones alongside her muscular arms, indicates poverty and toil. I'm thinking of Cinderella.
That's an interesting comparison.
And then Giovanna says, almost in the way of celebrating the worker in pre-World War II style.
Definitely. So I don't know if anyone here today has an experience of sewing or dressmaking or even garden design. It involves a process of imagining, making commitment, and really taking a chance. So here in this image, the cutting of the fabric, the visualizing of a garment is in a way, for the first piece, an experiment that sometimes will work and sometimes may not work and may need to be adjusted. So it's that flexibility. And in a way, cooperation between the seamstresses and also between the person who's commissioned the work to have a vision, to see it created, and perhaps make adjustments where required.
Moira says the model has a look of Edwardian business, and the women look like they're from a pre-World War II era. Well, the picture is like an image from the 50s. And then Brenda says, yes, I imagine the narrative to be these workers at the back of a boutique in the 30s. The well-off customer is the feminine shape, while the workers are strong, but not necessarily creative.
Very interesting.
Lovely narratives.
And people are, if we look down in pencil, on the outside of the woodblock, we can see the artist's handwriting, 1/50, and scrawled in pencil is the title Dressmakers, with the artist's name and the date of 1937. So it is that pre-World War II, and also the period of time where if you required a garment, you would visit a tailor or a seamstress. And there were people who were creative in terms of imagining garments and cutting and sewing them into reality. Just like the artist's studio, this dressmaker's studio here is showing the reality of that creative process. The intensity of focus, the risk-taking with those scissors, and the creative flair with the needle and thread. I'm going to share with you the artist and the title. And that title, well, the artist is Ailsa Lee Brown. And with the artwork, as we saw, titled Dressmakers from 1937. This is quite a small work, being 25.2 by 17 centimetres. So I'd like you to imagine the block of wood that the artist would have sketched and then physically carved out. All those areas of white highlight. And the white here is the raw paper. So again, that the process of carving a wood block requires that experimentation, requires that risk-taking. Once that carving, that piece of wood has been removed from the block, you can't replace it. You need to move forward to the next piece. And we can see here the artist's hand in the background with those short diagonals that break the darkness of the black wall, as well as the experimentation on the table with those speckled dots of black. So the artist is experimenting with line, with texture and shadow to create a very modern image. We're going to move to our third work, which will take us in a very different direction. So when we talk of creativity, of artistic work, we often think of two-dimensional or three-dimensional artworks. But here we want to also invite us to think of performers who use their body to express ideas and imagination. So I invite you to take some time to adjust your eyes to this flamboyant use of colour. This is a dynamic piece of movement, of rehearsal, experimentation, and risk-taking. Being our third work and the physicality of this work, I invite you to take note of your own posture, your breath. As we look at this artwork and appreciate the physicality, the balance and pose of these characters. We have three protagonists. In this composition, arranged almost like a triangle. So our vision flutters from one to another. This work invites us to explore the creative practice through our senses. I invite you to imagine, what sounds would you hear if you were in this space? Perhaps you may hear the sound of the balls on the performer's hands, the pat of the ball in a rhythm. You may hear the motion of the fan swooping through the air. Or you might even hear the sound of the male performer's feet tapping on the floor when he changes the balance from one leg to another. Do you imagine that there is music to accompany these performers? Is the music slow, melodic, or quick-paced? There's an energy that accompanies this painting, not only in the movement of the figures, but in the vibrant colours, the purple, reds, oranges, and blue. These performers are collaborating.
We have a comment. They look cramped and a collision is imminent.
Perhaps they're rehearsing, working out their act. And I imagine that they know each other very well, and they know each other's, perhaps their routine, or perhaps they're developing a new routine. But there's definitely that element of exploration.
Going back to your comment about the music, Danielle, I imagine a very upbeat, almost anticipatory kind of building up to kind of a crescendo of, can they maintain these acts and for how long?
Definitely.
Paula mentions they look like they're all leaning into a stiff breeze. The dancer's scarf and curtains are blowing in the wind.
That's true. There is a sense of movement. Perhaps there's a door open or a window open. They're definitely somewhere warm. where the stale air of perhaps this studio needs to be refreshed. This work reminds me of balance. Not only the obvious balance of the male figure, balancing a ceramic bowl on his forehead while he balances delicately on one leg through a hula hoop. And the balance of the juggler on one knee, but a balance of performance in itself, the risk-taking that performers take every time they go on stage or street theatre, of the unknown, the responsiveness that they need to take with their body to each other as well as the audience. To me, these characters, these figures here, would have the ability to perform anywhere, on a street, on a theatre, in a small space. Performance is part of their life, part of their blood.
We have a comment. Catherine says, I'm tilting my head to look at it. And I know what she means. You kind of feel like you have to lean to one side. And Kai says, I like the jug of flowers haphazardly placed on the floor, partly on the rug, as if to be broken soon if the rug slips.
Gives a sense of the bohemian life.
Lisa says it's very playful with strong and open body stances.
Mm. Definitely. In comparison to the previous works, this is more imaginative in terms of the artist definitely observing the figures in moments, but then documenting and sketching and creating a scene, almost as if we have interrupted or magically put a spell on the performers to make them still, so we can observe their energy. It's almost as if we can tap into their energy in this frozen scene.
It also appears if they're rehearsing that they've got a lot of stage makeup on. Looks like rouge and lipstick and eye makeup. So they're well made up.
So perhaps they're warming up for a performance. And so they're partially getting ready, but warming up in a very small green room or backstage.
I have another comment. Their energy is expressed, I think, by the vibrant colors of the work.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to invite you to consider a title for these works, for this work.
Before title suggestions come in, we have another comment from Anne. She says, I get a very strong sense that they're moving around in a circle.
Yes, I get that sense as well. I'll share with you the artist and the title of the work. The work is by the Australian artist Rupert Bunny, and the title is Saltimbancs. So a group of street performers. And this is quite a large painting. It's 178 by 178.5 centimetres square. So it's a very large work that if you stand in front, you definitely would read it with your body. And as Catherine, you commented of feeling that you're going to tip over when you look at it, I can imagine in the flesh, you would feel that you were part of that troupe as well if you're standing in front of it. I'm going to move to our summary slide to explore the three works in comparison. So we first started off with the E. Phillips Fox vertical painting. Again, another very large painting, and observing a group of art students responding to a direct experience of a model, homing in their craft and being quite focused. And then we moved to a woodblock print by Ailsa Lee Brown, a small print, but a very bold, modern and powerful image of the creativity and skill of the dressmakers who take yarn and fabric and thread to create a garment, perhaps for an occasion, perhaps making something amazing for a client. And then we moved to the Rupert Bunny painting of the street performers who use their body to express a language of experimentation, joy, and colour. So I'd like to invite you to perhaps nominate the work which was able to resonate with you today, perhaps from your own personal experience, from your own creative practice, or perhaps the visual image which resonated most. Oh, that's very interesting. So we had 53% of participants who voted respond to the art students. And then the dressmaker and the Rupert Bunny, very close. So these are three Australian artists who really created unique visions. The first with the art students responding to a scene, being true to a direct experience. And then with the woodblock print, we saw an image that was created in a very modern style that reflected the 21st century, moved to labour and to the celebration of a commercial market. And then the third, Rupert Bunny in Saltimbancs, really celebrates colour, vibrancy, and the bohemian way of life. So I hope you've enjoyed the 3 artworks that were shared today. I'm going to transition to inviting you to share a creative response. So as Catherine earlier mentioned, you're invited to share a response to the theme we explored today. And perhaps you could take a photograph of a recent creative project that you have perhaps participated in the last few months at home. You could create a sketch, collage, or painting, or even submit a piece of writing that explores the theme of the creative process. And you can share that via the email for culturedose@blackdog.org.au. At the Art Gallery of New South Wales on our website, we'll place these artworks in an art set for you to revisit and perhaps share with someone else and lead them through a similar experience. And on behalf of the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Black Dog Institute, we trust that you've had an experience today that has allowed you to be present and to consider the creative processes in our lives, and perhaps to connect with the unique visions that these 3 artists presented and shared about the world that they experienced. In a few moments, a survey will pop up in your browser, and we ask that you take a few minutes, if you have time, to share your experience. And we invite you to consider connecting with us again in a fortnight, where our next session will be themed around the connection to place. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye for now.